Welcome to the Essentially You podcast. Once again, one of my dearest friends, Ari, honey, how are you doing?
I am so great. Such a pleasure to see you as always.
And we match. Clearly, we texted before we got on this and coordinated our outfits. I love that. How
That's
is
right.
Costa Rica?
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Well, the rainy season is hit now, so the surf isn't quite as good. The trails are muddy, so this is kind of my cue to leave for a little while and come back when the surf is turned back on.
I love it. I love it. Well, I'm so glad you're loving it there. And that means you're probably going to come visit me, which makes me
I
even
am.
happier. So thank you, Costa Rica, for the rain. We're talking
Yes.
about a topic that you and this has been our, I don't want to call it obsession, but definitely passion. And that is how we can help women and men really want to know what they can do to get their energy back, what they
Mhm.
can do to not feel tired and exhausted and on edge, right? Brain fogged. And I know that this has been your life's work for so long. And I know you've got a book coming out that really focuses on food for energy. But what I would love to do before we get into the nuts and bolts, because I know everyone wants to know, like, what do I need to eat to get my energy back? I would love to just dive into why we are seeing so many people struggle with low energy or feeling tired all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's a big topic. How many hours do you have? So the super short version of it is it's the same set of reasons that is driving over 80% of the disease burden in Western society, which is there's a mismatch between our evolutionary design, how we've been designed by millions of years of evolution, and the modern environment that we are now living in and the modern lifestyle that we now have. So things like nutrition, things like circadian rhythm and sleep disruption, light deficiencies and toxicities, things like exposure to environmental toxicants, poor gut health, blood sugar dysregulation that results from these kinds of things of how the nutrition and how these environmental toxicants and circadian rhythm and psychological stress and chronic sleep deprivation and poor gut health and poor brain health and are all tying inside of our physiology, along with another big one is lack of hormetic stress. So sedentary lifestyles and the sort of, we can talk about hormesis and what that entails, but basically modern lifestyles that are lacking in various kinds of hormetic stressors that used to be the norm for how humans existed for most of human evolution, resulting in basically a combination of two things. I like to think of fatigue and energy levels as having two fundamental causes. One is what's going on at the environmental and lifestyle level. So this collection of things like nutrition, circadian rhythm, psychological stress, and environmental toxicants, and so on, and how much total body stress load you have from these various kinds of stressors in your life, along with what's going on inside of your body, inside of your cells. And specifically, what I mean by that is your mitochondria, your cellular energy generators. You can either have cells filled with lots of mitochondria that are big, strong, robust, and healthy and pumping out lots of energy, or you can have cells filled with weak and fragile and damaged and dysfunctional mitochondria and very few of them, because depending on your lifestyle habits, those mitochondria literally shrink and shrivel and die off as you get older, to the extent that the typical 70-year-old living in the United States has about only 25% of the mitochondrial capacity of a 20-year-old. And the key part there is that it's not just a normal byproduct of the aging process. This is not supposed to be happening. And we know that because when we look at 70-year-olds who are lifelong exercisers and athletes, they have the same mitochondrial capacity as a young adult. And what that's telling you is that this is not a function of aging per se, it's a function of the modern lifestyle and lack of hormetic stress, lack of challenging those mitochondria. So the combination, basically, to summarize all that, the combination of too high of stress load, taxing your body's cellular energy generators, your mitochondria, combined with too weak of a cellular engine, too weak of your cells are filled with weak and shriveled mitochondria and too few of them creates a situation of overwhelm where energy demand exceeds energy supply. The result is fatigue, chronic low energy levels.
Mm. I want to talk from a place today, because we've had a lot of different conversations around this, is I want to talk from a place of where someone is depleted. They're across the board, hormone levels are just flatlined. We know that there is inherent mitochondrial dysfunction that's happening, that to a point, the level of fatigue and exhaustion, tiredness, maybe not even won't lend to a lot of hormesis, or at least hardcore hormesis, because they're just exhausted, right? Like they do a big workout or they do fasting and it just depletes them even more because they don't really have anything to give. I really want to speak to that person today who is thinking to themselves, like they're feeling so exhausted that they're almost feeling pretty unmotivated because they don't see their way out of it. You know, that level of tiredness, and kind of where we can start if we're there, you know, because that's a lot to rebuild. That's a lot to get mitochondria. I guess the question is let's say someone is at that level. And I think that there are a third of US adults are there, a minimum. How do they even begin to rebuild robust mitochondria from a place of depletion?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, honestly,
Honestly.
we talk about supplements are supplements, right? Supplements,
Yes.
from the frame that you and I would talk about it, are supposed to be supplementary to doing the foundational work of, getting your nutrition in place, getting your lifestyle habits in place. But the truth is, in the situation, in the context that you're describing, supplements are actually a phenomenal place to start.
I agree.
Because there are supplements that you can use that have been shown, for example, I'll mention a few specific ones, that have been shown to dramatically increase energy levels and cut a lot of other symptoms that are commonly co-occur with people with chronic fatigue, like the context you're describing. Somebody's flatlined on all those hormone levels. You can also expect them to have low libido, to be depressed, to be anxious, to not sleep very well, to have brain fog and irritability and low resilience to stress, right? There are supplements that literally in the span of 1 week, for example, in the rhodiola rosea is a great example, has been shown in adults with chronic stress-related exhaustion to, in 7 days, cut their levels of fatigue in half, cut their level of anxiety in half, cut their level of impaired concentration or brain fog in half, with further reductions out at 30 days. So in 7 days, you can dramatically increase your energy levels and brain function and subjective mood, and immediately get a win and get some bit of energy bubbling up that then can motivate you to then take a bit of action to maybe take one step towards getting a better nutrition plan in place, or to take one step towards optimizing your sleep and circadian rhythm, or one step towards optimizing your gut health or your brain health, or just one step, whatever the next step is for you that maybe takes a bit more effort. Start with supplements, get a quick win, get some more energy in your life. And then from there, it's really easy to make further improvements. And then you can, from there, start still, even with lifestyle habits, there's lots of easy things that don't really take hardly any effort, but can provide a quick win. So you don't have to commit to hour-long intense workouts 7 days a week, right? Why don't you start with 2 hours before bedtime, put on some blue blocking glasses or blue and green blocking glasses, such that you're not suppressing melatonin anymore. Melatonin, it turns out, is not just, many people think of it as like a sleep supplement, or many people know it's a sleep hormone. Well, it turns out it's actually the most potent mitochondrial antioxidant we know of. Your mitochondria, your cellular energy generators, need to be getting bathed in this melatonin every night. Well, just being in your home under standard room lighting, let alone looking at bright computer screens and TVs and cell phones and that kind of thing, suppresses melatonin levels by upwards of 70%. You're suppressing massively suppressing levels of this vital mitochondrial hormone that is supposed to be protecting and helping to recharge and rejuvenate your mitochondria every night. Most people are suppressing that hormone by massive amounts every day for years, for decades. So you can start there, start giving your mitochondria the ability to recharge themselves and reboot every night. And that's a wonderful way of doing it. Another way to get a little cutting edge.
So besides the blue blockers, do you recommend, if someone's really struggling with sleep and severe chronic exhaustion, to supplement with a little bit of melatonin? Is that a recommendation as well? Or how do you feel about that? Would you say the better way is just to block out the blue light?
It's a more complex answer. It's unfortunately not a simple answer. So here's the reason it's not simple. I happen to be one of a subset of people, as is my father, who are hyper sensitive to melatonin supplementation. For me, it causes extreme insomnia, and I'll feel terrible the next morning if I use even a common sort of dosage. I've experimented heavily with it, and I can do very small dosages. It turns out that what we conceptualize as small or a normal dose is kind of odd, actually, because the true physiological dose that our brain is producing each night is about 300 micrograms, which is 0.3 milligrams, which is 1/10 of the dosage that's like considered a standard normal dose of melatonin supplements. So it's weird that we've got a 10 times physiological dose as sort of accepted as the norm. And it's also the melatonin research is this weird area where there's a huge amount of really impressive research. And you look at that like I did and you go, wow, this is an incredible supplement. I want to start supplementing with melatonin. And I did, and it made me way worse, and it really caused problems for me. So yet there's other people that can supplement with not only 3 milligrams, but 6 or 10 or 20, or I just saw a study the other day in young, healthy athletes where they used 100 milligram dosages, which that's the highest I've ever seen. I've seen, prior to that 60 and 80, and in the context of like treating Alzheimer's disease and certain types of cancers and things like that. But hadn't seen 100. And they say it's well tolerated by most without significant side effects. So the category that I'm in appears to be rare, yet it is a thing. And I've polled my audience, and I estimate among people with chronic fatigue, at least, because that's my demographic, it's at least 10%, if not closer to 20%, that seem to be very sensitive to it. The individual proper dose, like some people do 40 milligrams and feel awesome with it. Some people do 20, 10, 5, whatever. So I do think it's a useful supplement, particularly for older adults. However, be aware that if you're one of the subset of people like me, you will find that a very small, like a baby dose of it is best. And that if you go higher than that, you might have negative effects. So you just got to experiment, find the proper dose for you. But first, optimize your body's own production of melatonin. And there's 2 really key aspects to that. One is bright light during the day, and especially during the morning, and then minimize the exposure to blue light and ideally green light in the evenings, and wear the blue blockers, get F-Lux or Twilight or Iris on your computers and your phones, and these kind of blue light blocking apps. And modify the indoor lighting in your home, ideally incandescents and halogens instead of fluorescents and LEDs. Dim lighting in the evening, candle lighting is also a good idea as long as your home's not going to catch on fire. And
that's good. Good to know. Yeah.
Got to make sure I don't set anybody's home on fire inadvertently. And then apart from that, the other thing I want to mention that's a new, pretty cutting edge scientific discovery is actually, I would say almost nobody knows this yet. It turns out that melatonin is such an important hormone to mitochondria. It's been now discovered that melatonin is not only produced by the pineal gland in the brain and then pumped into your blood, into your circulation, but it's so important to mitochondria that mitochondria actually evolved the ability millions of years ago to produce their own melatonin at the cellular level outside of the brain. And that melatonin stays inside of the cell. It doesn't enter into circulation. So it's produced by the mitochondria for the mitochondria. And I think that in 5 or 10 years, that story is not only going to be known, but it's going to be recognized as one of the most important aspects of mitochondrial health and overall health and disease prevention and longevity. So I think this is a huge discovery. And here's the other amazing aspect of it. One of the main things that pumps up that source of melatonin is light exposure, specifically red and near infrared light, which is a subject I've written a book about. So but this is actually such a new discovery. It didn't even make it into my book. I've only learned this after writing my book. Yeah. So it's fascinating that this form of light actually penetrates deep below the skin surface into our cells, directly into our mitochondria, where it's stimulating the mitochondria to produce massively more melatonin. So, this isn't yet another reason why getting adequate sun exposure cannot be replaced, why you cannot replace the sun with a vitamin D pill, because we get much, much more from sunlight than just vitamin D. And this is yet another example of that, of the importance of sunlight. And, for anybody who can't get adequate sunlight, make sure you're doing red and near infrared light therapy.
I think that those are probably easy wins too, regarding, things that we can do if you're just that level of depleted, getting out and just walking outside in the sun, or doing red light therapy. I know we've talked about that on other interviews as well. Like, these are ways to help bolster up those mitochondria and to help kind of give you that little energy boost. But I just wanted to speak into, I knew melatonin was going to come up as well today. And I wanted to just address the question that so many people have around supplementing with melatonin. But I mean, what are other things that we can do that you mentioned that can help boost melatonin naturally if we do need to go in and kind of figure out what the right dosage is for us to kind of give ourselves? Like you said, we talked about the kickoff this call was like, what do you do when you're on the ground, crawling? And supplements are always going to be that kickstart that's going to get you through that hardest time. That's going to get you to that next level of like, okay, now that I'm feeling okay enough, I'm functioning kind of enough, what's the next step I can take to get myself to a better place? So I'm so grateful that you went into that about circadian rhythms and what we can do to boost melatonin levels as well. Any other thing that you think in terms of a win? Supplementing being a big part of this, getting our body back online circadian wise, and getting sunlight. Anything else? And then let's get into the sustainable.
Yeah, there certainly are. I mean, I could mention many other different supplements that also have the same kind of benefits of like massive improvements in energy levels or brain function within a few weeks. So there's more quick wins to discuss with supplementation. I would say like really optimizing circadian rhythm and sleep is just such a huge one. If you implement some of those things, and some of them are one-time things. For example, modifying the lighting in your home. If you get a few little lamps with an incandescent bulb to just turn off all the ceiling lighting and the typically fluorescent LED lighting in your home in the evenings, and you get in the habit of just switching on some dim incandescent lighting, particularly in any living areas that you spend time in the evenings, and your bedroom and your bathroom connected to your bedroom. Make sure that it's at the very least dim incandescent or red lights in those environments, or candlelight. And if you do that, that's stuff that you only have to do once. You've only got to put in the effort to do that once, to switch out those bulbs, buy those lamps, whatever you need to do, and then you're done. You've got to do this once to get blackout curtains and make your bedroom completely dark at night. And it makes a huge difference, because we have research showing that even very small amounts of light that most people would imagine have no physiological effect whatsoever have been linked with depression, have been linked with fatigue and poor sleep quality. So if you can optimize your sleep as a great place to start, that can, I think in the context you're describing, somebody who's just got no energy to do really anything significant as far as changing their routines, make those small one-time changes and they'll pay big dividends over time.
Well, and I think once you move to the incandescent lights, the dim lights as well, like you're not going to go back. Yeah, I go to families' homes, it's for the holidays and whatnot, and lights are on everywhere. And I'm just like, I can't
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah.
Because it's so dim in our home. Like
Yeah.
after 6 o'clock, our house is just dimmed down. And you just such a great reminder, because the only room left that I've got to fix that we haven't, because we just moved into a new house in Lucadia,
Mhm.
is my bathroom. It's the worst lighting in there. So I'll be in the living room, I'll be in our bedroom. It's really dark for hours and hours. And then I have to go brush my teeth, wash my face, do those things. And it's this nasty, harsh light. And I'm just like, why is this happening to me right now? And
Yeah.
I need to let Alex know that we've got to get on top of that
Totally.
stat, because it just messes everything up. Every time I go in there, it's like a reset, but not a
Yeah.
good reset, like a
Yeah.
bad reset. So yeah, and I love it. It's a one-time change. And blackout curtains are just like a game changer.
Yeah.
Such a game changer. So
It's
I
the
love that.
worst when you're in an Airbnb and like you turn on the bathroom light and it's got those just like 10 fluorescent lights just boom, blasting you in the face. And it's funny because people who haven't changed their lighting yet just have normalized to that.
Mhm.
And they think it's actually bizarre that somebody would be sensitive to it. But once you have a strong circadian rhythm, then you become sensitive to having that disrupted by bright lights blaring into your face when your body's in it's winding down for sleep, and
Mm.
everything's your physiology shifting into that relaxation, rejuvenation, sleep mode, and then being blasted in the face with bright lights disturbs that, and you can feel the differential.
Oh yeah, it's an assault to the
Hmm.
system is what it feels like someone's attacking you with light is what it
Hmm.
will. And so
Yeah.
I think that if there was something to do, if you wanted a weekend activity, go to Home Depot or go wherever you go on Amazon, get the lights, make the switch, get the blackout
Yeah.
curtains, make the switch. We just realized that Kingston's room, our baby's room, is just not blackout enough. And so we're about to upgrade his blackout curtains. We got like the organic linen, curtains, and they're just not cutting it. So this is
Yeah.
another area where we're making those changes as well. So fixing sleep, getting on circadian rhythms, anything you want to also add about circadian rhythm?
My new book is called Eat for Energy: How to Beat Fatigue, Supercharge Your Mitochondria, and Unlock All-Day Energy. And a lot of people write diet books, as you know. A lot of our colleagues and friends write diet books, and a lot of it tends to come from the frame of, not all of it, but a lot of it is like people trying to claim to have the next big thing, right? And it's like everybody's got it wrong. The real way to eat, it's not low fat, it's not low carb, it's not vegan, it's not keto, it's not paleo, it's not Mediterranean. Really, it's this other thing. And they're trying to promote the one true best human diet. And for everybody listening who's smart, who knows some nutrition science, who's been around the block for a few years in this area, you should know that that stuff is almost always nonsense and just cherry picked and kind of people trying to become the next big thing, because there's a lot of money in it if you become the next big thing successfully. Like if you become the next keto or paleo, you can make a whole lot of money. What I'm doing in this book is really not that at all. I'm not claiming this is the one true best way to eat. I'm compiling many, many decades of nutrition science and putting together a whole bunch of flexible nutrition strategies that can be layered with and integrated into basically any dietary pattern that you want, everything from keto to veganism to whatever. A lot of the focus is also on low-hanging fruit and quick wins, easy things to implement. So there's a whole chapter on optimizing circadian rhythm that is actually not even about anything that we just talked about, because everything we just talked about is about optimizing the central clock in the brain. Well, we also have peripheral circadian clocks throughout the whole body that, while the central clock's primarily responsive to light inputs, these peripheral clocks in all the different organs and tissues of our body, our muscle, our heart, our liver, our intestines, our brain, and everything is actually primarily responsive to nutritional inputs. And the goal of optimizing your circadian rhythms in total is to synchronize the central clock and the peripheral clocks. So in the book, I talk about a whole bunch of nutritional strategies that can be integrated into that. For example, around time-restricted eating, about calorie stacking, and a couple other ones that amplify the circadian rhythms and again help synchronize peripheral and central clocks together. So I would say there's low-hanging fruit there. I'll briefly overview the kind of the rest of the book, and then we can dive into any specific topic from there. The second chapter is on body composition. So how do you optimize your body composition in terms of how much fat and how much muscle you have? Over 80%, and actually based on some estimates that integrate body composition metrics with blood biomarkers, about 90% of the population is over fat. It's carrying too much body fat. That's a major cause of fatigue. I have a whole bunch of nutritional strategies for how do you optimize that. Many of them are very easy to implement. It doesn't involve going on extreme restrictive diets. The next chapter is all about blood sugar dysregulation. Over 80% of the population is regularly experiencing spikes into the pre-diabetic and diabetic blood sugar ranges. 1/3 of adults experience hypoglycemia, reactive hypoglycemia, 2 to 5 hours after eating, where they're dipping into low blood sugar. And what goes along with that is glycemic variability, shifting back and forth between big spikes and dips, is a major contributor to fatigue. There's also, very easy strategies that you can implement there that can make a huge difference. The next chapter is on gut health and how to optimize that. That's a major pathway. We know obviously there's a gut-brain axis, there's a gut mitochondria axis. There's lots of important stuff that goes on with our gut health in impacting energy levels. The next chapter is on brain health and how to optimize that, and the sort of the different levers of how the brain works that affect our energy levels. And then part 2 of the book is superfoods and supplements. And anyway, that's the super fast overview, and I'll let you kind of dive in to whichever of those topics you want.
Oh goodness. It feels like I'm at a buffet of energy solutions. So fun. You talked about that we're holding on to a lot of fat, potentially maybe organ fat, liver fat. We're not utilizing that as an energy source. And you're saying that can be contributing to fatigue. Do you connect that with the interplay with the deregulated sugar as well in the book? Absolutely. So talk to me a little bit about that we've got all this reservoir of stored energy that we're not even tapping into. Instead, we're on a sugar roller coaster, right? Where you're seeing that major dip and crash where, you drink the Frappuccino at 11 o'clock in the morning, liquid sugar, you hit 200 milligrams per deciliter, and then your body has to respond and you drop down to 55 milligrams, in like 30 minutes, you go from 200 to 55 like that. And your brain has to like rebound from that, sending new messages. So I'd love for you to speak into kind of what were some of your recommendations around that conundrum.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, you teed it up well for me, because I found a lot of practitioners, if not most practitioners, don't actually know the major cause of insulin resistance that leads to hyperglycemia. Many people will talk about, carbs and spiking insulin, spiking blood sugar, eating this or that food. They'll talk about, alcohol, or, maybe sleep and circadian rhythm disruption, which is a good one, or, other specific toxins or, things like that. But the most important contributor to blood sugar dysregulation and insulin resistance, becoming pre-diabetic or diabetic, is actually fat itself. Mm-hmm. The accumulation of excess body fat is the primary cause of insulin resistance. So to go one step further, there are studies that have shown that by addressing how much fat you have on your body, you can take full-blown type 2 diabetics that have been diabetic for years and who have been on medication for years, and you can completely reverse their type 2 diabetes within a matter of weeks, simply through fat loss. Mm-hmm. Okay,
and that's particularly organ fat loss. It's got to be we've got to get rid of that liver fat. We've got to get rid of that organ fat, but it's fat loss through and through.
Yes. Yeah. So exceeding your personal fat threshold, and everybody has a unique fat threshold. Some people, it only takes, some people can gain a huge amount of body fat before they will become significantly, measurably insulin resistant. Yes. For other people, it only takes a little bit of excess body fat accumulation before they're starting to exceed their personal fat threshold. and then becoming insulin resistant and suffering the consequences of that. Fat cells can only hold so much fat. And if you expand that, they'll sort of create signals to grow more fat cells and more fat cells. But if you keep pushing that and pushing it, which modern society and the modern diet does, those fat cells grow and expand as much as they can. They build as many new fat cells as they can, and they all become leaky, and they don't do their job of soaking up excess nutrients that are floating around in the blood as well anymore, because they can't hold anymore. It's like you can only fill a balloon so much before it can't hold anymore and before it pops. So that's what's happening to our fat cells. The consequences of that are, number one, if they're not soaking up excess nutrients very well, those excess nutrients, having high blood sugar or chronically high triglycerides and so on, is directly cytotoxic. It's directly toxic to mitochondria. So just being in a state of high blood sugar, chronically especially, is literally damaging your cellular energy generators. In addition to that, when they become chronically filled and leaky in this way, they end up chronically secreting inflammatory cytokines. So those inflammatory cytokines are also a signal to mitochondria to turn down the dial on energy production. So And in addition, when they're not soaking up nutrients well, they become insulin resistant. They can't soak up the blood glucose, and so it floats around in the bloodstream. You get hyperglycemia. So anyway, there's multiple mechanisms that are important that are going on there, but this is the major driver of insulin resistance and blood sugar dysregulation. So the most important step for correcting that is, of course, to lose excess body fat. Now, that's a bit of a larger discussion, and it's a bit harder work to dramatically change your body composition. So let me give you, kind of in the spirit of our initial context of the person you gave me, like, what are some easy things that are extremely low effort that can make a difference? Well, check this out. There's research showing that not even changing what's on your plate, but simply the order in which you eat what's on your plate, by eating leafy greens, non-starchy vegetables, fibrous vegetables on your plate first in the meal, just that one strategy alone was able to take people from an average hemoglobin A1C, which is a marker of insulin resistance, of 8.3 to 6.8 just within a few weeks, just from doing that one super simple low effort thing, right? There's also studies showing that if you, and I should also mention that's near the cutoff for diabetes. The cutoff for diabetes is 6.5.
Why? I think it's 6.2, but that's just me.
It's 6.5.
Yeah.
So it's almost taking diabetics and putting them into the pre-diabetic range just from this one little strategy.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're going to say something?
No. Continue on.
Okay. So one other thing in that same vein is protein. Eat the protein first in your meal. First of all, most people don't eat enough protein. That's a major factor in body composition, both building muscle and contributing to fat loss. Super, super important to eat enough protein. But also, again, like with the non-starchy vegetables, eating the protein first in the meal, or eating in this way, you can eat the protein and the non-starchy vegetables first in the meal, makes a huge difference in terms of post-meal blood sugar regulation. Now, again, you're not even changing what you're eating. It's literally just changing the order in which you eat it. Makes a huge difference. Another super simple thing is to use acetic acid, to use vinegar, or to use lemon juice also works. So you can squeeze a lemon in a glass of water before your meal. You can put vinegar all over those non-starchy vegetables that you're eating first in your meal. Makes a big difference in terms of blood sugar regulation. Or to integrate supplements into this, now you can start using things like cinnamon. Cinnamon has been shown in numerous studies to be as effective as metformin in managing blood sugar levels. Same with berberine, another compound as effective as metformin in managing blood sugar levels. You can integrate chromium, you can integrate alpha lipoic acid. All of those things I just mentioned take virtually zero effort to do. And if you integrate all of those, whatever 4 or 5 super low effort things that I just mentioned into your life, you haven't even changed your diet at all yet.
No,
And
not
yet
yet.
you've made a massive impact on your blood sugar regulation, which is one of the major drivers of your energy levels.
Yeah, and we've dove so deep into this on the show because I know so many women are struggling with insulin resistance and then also the fatigue. And then the other thing I think that people take for granted, I say it's the most underrated thing that you can do for blood sugar is walking 30 minutes after dinner. Just
Absolutely.
walking 30 minutes after dinner. That's all you got to do. I mean, yes, eat the protein first, and you can even prime the pump with protein. You can eat protein 15 minutes before dinner and prime that up. And so, but yeah, we haven't even talked about changing food yet, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Dessert is still on the table right now. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
white rice is still on the table at the moment.
Yeah.
Just implementing these supplements, and again, taking the berberine 30 to 45 minutes before a meal, making sure that you're adding that vinegar or that lemon juice on the salad. That's like your pre-game salad before dinner. Those are going to completely blunt a blood sugar response or blood sugar spike. But let's talk about, I do want to put food on the table. I do want to talk about the kind of food that we should be thinking about for boosting energy. Cause when I saw the title of the book, when I heard what the book was about, I was super excited because I don't think people think a lot about leveraging food to use energy. Clearly food is fuel. It's information. It's so much of how our bodies function. But I think about all the conversations we've had around circadian rhythm, supplementation, hormesis. Those have been the things that at least we've had conversations around moving the needle. But I would love to know what foods are on the table. And I know there's no hype diet here. There's no magic pill here, unless you want to call chromium, cinnamon, and berberine magic pills. What are the foods that you have found, the life-giving foods, the mitochondrial giving foods that can help move the needle for people after they implement the hacks to blunt their blood sugar response?
Yeah. Several years ago, one of my favorite nutrition researchers, he's the former head of Yale's Prevention Research Center, Dr. David Katz, and he's author of the main clinical nutrition textbook used to educate doctors on nutrition. He wrote a paper called "Can We Say What Diet is Best for Health?" And they looked at all the different dietary patterns out there, paleo and low fat and low carb and keto and Mediterranean and whatever else, DASH diet and so on. And basically their conclusion was there is inadequate evidence to say any one of these is superior to the other. And the conclusions that we can draw from the body of nutrition science is, number one, whole foods. Eat whole foods, get rid of processed foods. That is by far the most important rule of nutrition. So much focus is put on, macronutrients and eat this proportion of carbs to fats and da-da-da-da-da. People have been obsessed with carbs and fats for decades and trying to make various claims around that. The truth is that the research doesn't support that there's much to that. I will say at the very least, it's been greatly overstated how important that is, particularly when we're talking about unrefined whole foods. There isn't a strong case that eating olive oil is better than blueberries, or that eating coconut oil is superior to sweet potatoes or something like that. Like you can't make those kinds of claims. If anything, I'd argue that there's much stronger, health benefits associated with sweet potatoes, for example.
They spike me like nobody's business. We
really?
talk about that on the show. It's like one superfood. I'm like, really? Yeah. You gotta spike to 150 milligrams per deciliter every time I eat you, even when I eat protein and fiber first.
All right, well, switch out the carrots, switch out the sweet potatoes for carrots or beets or something. There you go. So the same principle of what I just said still applies, but the second principle was mostly plants. Mostly plants. Okay. Meaning, and that doesn't necessarily mean, there's multiple interpretations of this, doesn't necessarily mean by calories. It could be based on the volume of food that's on your plate. Okay. It should be comprised of mostly plant foods, unprocessed whole plant foods. And the last one is the animal foods that you do eat should be from natural sources. Basically they say something cute like, we are what we eat. And so animals are what they eat. And so they should be eating a diet that's aligned with their evolution. And in other words, don't factory farm your animal food. Get it naturally raised and as close to nature as possible, because eating grass-fed, pasture-raised beef and poultry is vastly different than eating factory farmed versions of those same foods. Those three principles basically define what to eat. Those are the three foundational rules that I completely agree with. And everything else really is debatable. Like, whether do you want to eat wheat and oats and quinoa in your diet? No. I hate grains. Do you want to eat lentils? No, I'm afraid of lectins from the lentils and the beans. I don't want to eat those. Do you want to eat tomatoes? No, I'm afraid of nightshades, right? Whatever else. And some people do maybe react to some of those foods. There's individual variation. There's room for interpretation. I definitely disagree with anybody who's demonizing those kinds of foods in any sort of universal way. Beyond those three rules, there's lots of room for experimenting with different carb and fat ratios, high or low protein intake. I'm a big advocate of higher protein intake. In the book, I'm much more flexible on carb and fat ratios. You can do more what you want with those carb and fat ratios, provided you're adhering to those foundational rules of whole food, unprocessed food. And making good food choices, right? Like lentils and carrots and beets are great carb sources.
Broccoli is too. Squashes are great.
Yeah, cookies and pastries, not so much.
Not
right?
so much. Those aren't on the list.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, there's a whole chapter on superfoods as well. I'm not in the book, I'm not really recommending anybody goes on any extreme diet. I'm putting much less focus on like eliminate this and get rid of that. These are bad foods. These are bad foods, because that's been done to death. And the truth is, people know that donuts and ice cream and pizza are not good for them. There's no confusion about that. The issue is those foods are tasty and pleasurable and addicting. And so, I'm putting much more focus on the best foods to eat and the principles of how to eat and when to eat, and the order of how you eat your foods, like the couple strategies that I mentioned here, and things of that nature. So much more of a positive focus on what you're adding into your diet than on any sort of extreme, remove this, remove these bad foods sort of approach.
I think that is so, I just love that that's exactly what you're doing. I think we're addressing the big elephant in the room, which is the hyperinsulinemia, the insulin resistance, the excess fat that we're holding on to in our organs. These are the issues. Mm-hmm. And eating foods to reverse those issues are how we're going to create longevity and mitochondrial health. And I think that's exactly what you're pinning here. So I know you had a hard stop a couple of minutes ago. So I'm going to go and we're shout this book from the rooftops. I can't wait to get a copy of it. And I am so, so grateful to you for digging deep into this research. And we're so in need of this book around the world, especially here in the US as adults. So I just want to say, Ari, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your brilliance, and congratulations on this groundbreaking book that really gets to the core root of what so many of us are dealing with.
Thank you so much, my friend. And on a personal note, I know you mentioned that your new house is in Leucadia. I'm excited to hear that, because we're going to be staying in Leucadia starting next month for 3 months. So we're going to do lots of beach walks and dinners together and stuff like that. Yes. Go to lunch at Good Anya and grab some coffee or Nectarine Grove. I love Nectarine Grove.
Yeah, we are we're an 8-minute walk from Nectarine Grove.
Nice. And Hagos. I don't know if you've been to Hagos.
We are a 1-minute walk from Hagos. Nice. That's Epic. Where we live.
Awesome. Well, I'll see you there. I'll be just down the street from you.
Perfect.